Mount Carmel, a quiet prairie commune in central Texas. Located 10 miles outside the city of Waco, it was home to the Branch Davidians, a close-knit religious sect seeking answers buried in the Holy Scriptures. It hardly seemed possible that Mount Carmel would become ground zero for the most controversial and deadly armed siege in American history.
It went from a relatively minor investigation to one of the most horrific crime-type situations that law enforcement has ever had to face in this country.
Former FBI agent Byron Sage was at Waco when history was made there in 1993.
307 weapons and well over 1 million rounds of ammunition inside this, what's been portrayed as this sleepy little church on the plains of Texas.
Established in the 1930s, the Branch Davidians are an offshoot of the Seventh-day Adventist Church. Their focus is the book of Revelation and its prophecy of the coming apocalypse, heralding the triumphant return of Jesus Christ.
Wait on me to the day that I rise up to the grave.
By the late 1980s, a dedicated Bible student named Vernon Howell had emerged as the Davidians' new leader.
Lord, I have preached righteousness in the great congregation. What's he going to preach? Seven seals.
Howell claimed that he alone understood the Bible's cryptic 7 seals and its prophecy of Judgment Day, the armed battle between God's people and the forces of evil. In 1990, Howell declared himself a messenger of God and began calling himself David Koresh, a name with biblical connotations.
I became to believe that David was an inspired person, and of course I wanted to be around that wisdom all the time and learn everything that I could.
Musician David Thibodeau joined the multiracial community out of spiritual curiosity.
I was really impressed with the group and quality of people that I was meeting through David.
As the self-declared Lamb of God, Koresh alone slept with female members to beget God's chosen ones destined to survive the apocalypse.
He convinced them that their daughters, sometimes as young as 12 years old, would be blessed if they were allowed to become brides of David Koresh, become a part of what he referred to as the House of David.
Within 3 years, Koresh had fathered more than a dozen children and continued his obsessive study of the Holy Bible.
He wasn't a con man like the FBI said. You know, he was 100% real.
Revelation states that Christ has the key of David. Only he can open and none can shut. There's 150 Psalms here.
David, being the messenger, was that direct link in communication to the all-knowing. David was literally that good and that brilliant.
My belief is that David Koresh was Charlie Manson with a few more followers, or Jim Jones with a few less.
Peter Maston is an agent with the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms, or ATF.
That he was the ultimate manipulator, the ultimate controller of people, and that's what his game was.
By early 1992, acting on complaints from ex-members, various agencies were investigating Koresh for possible child abuse, involuntary servitude, and weapons violations. While the Davidians traded legally at gun shows for income, the ATF uncovered evidence of the stockpiling of unlicensed automatic rifles and illegal explosives.
Christ said, the time is coming and now is. Sell your cloak and buy a dagger to protect yourself in the time of the end and the time of trouble. And so it wasn't really going against the Scripture.
In late February 1993, in preparation for a raid on Mount Carmel, nearly 100 ATF agents spent 3 days training at Fort Hood, Texas. To obtain the use of military helicopters, the ATF alleged that Koresh was operating a methamphetamine lab.
It was just a manufactured excuse so they could get those helicopters. A bunch of boys with their toys.
Early Sunday morning, the ATF moved in on Mount Carmel, knowing that nearly 36 children were among the 130 members inside.
Our operation was designed to isolate those areas of that compound in which the firearms, in which medicines or other paraphernalia for a potential suicide would be located, to protect those children. The entire operation was planned in keeping the safety of those children in mind.
Around 8:30 a.m., an undercover ATF agent who had infiltrated the Daavidians learned that someone from the media had tipped off Koresh about the raid. With the element of surprise gone, the agent made a futile plea to call it off.
Our operation design in Waco was probably not conducive to getting that information to the people who needed to make those decisions. And that was a very fatal flaw in our operational strategies.
9:15 a.m. 3 military helicopters began circling overhead, while cattle trailers transported more than 100 heavily armed agents onto the property.
You could hear the helicopters coming in the background. David Koresh came downstairs. There's a few people with him. He said, "They're coming, they're on their way. Now, don't anyone do anything stupid. We want to talk to them. And we want to work it out." He ran to the front door. About 15 seconds later, it sounded like all hell broke loose.
I was the deputy incident commander, and I was the first agent off the second trailer. We were immediately taken under heavy automatic weapons fire from the front of the compound.
According to the Daavidians, the ATF started the shooting when it killed several dogs outside before firing through the front door as well as from the air.
Everyone I've talked to has emphatically stated that there were no shots fired from inside those helicopters.
Those helicopters fired into the building, and they know it, and they've lied about that.
I heard one shot and turned around and saw a line of machine gun fire come through the door outbound from the inside of the building. Those were the first shots I saw and heard. The Daavidians fired first.
Daavidian gunfire disabled 2 of the choppers, while agents on the ground took cover.
50 caliber armor-piercing rounds were directed at those officers. Improvised explosive devices, hand grenades.
From inside the compound, a Mount Carmel resident called 911, pleading with the local sheriff to have the assault called off.
Yeah, there's 75 men around our building and they're shooting at us in Mount Carmel. Mount Carmel? Yeah, tell them there are children and women in here to call it off. I hear gunfire. I'm under fire! I'm gonna call it off! What? I'm gonna pull back! I have a right to defend myself! It's started firing first!
But the battle raged on, leaving 4 ATF agents dead and 16 more wounded.
It's a terrible thing to watch your fellow agents murdered before your eyes and not being able to help them at all. We were pinned down for about 2.5 hours.
We were terrified. We were mistrustful. People keep saying, "Why didn't he come out?" When your house is attacked, that just goes against everything that's in a person.
Inside the compound, 6 Daavidians were killed and several were wounded, including David Koresh.
He negotiated a total of 3 ceasefires. The first 2 didn't work. We would try to move and get our dead and wounded, and the Daavidians would open fire on us again. The third time, we just did it.
Finally, the ATF ran out of ammunition, and a truce was struck. The Daavidians stopped firing and allowed the ATF to retreat, taking their dead and wounded with them.
The fact that they were alerted had them prepared, standing at the windows waiting for us, and the operation was doomed to fail.
Through the media, the ATF informed the public that its agents had been ambushed by a demonic cult leader and his followers. The Daavidians saw the government as the force of evil, validating their apocalyptic vision of Judgment Day. They barricaded themselves inside Mount Carmel, awaiting the government's next move. March 1st, 1993, the FBI assumed command at Waco.
The decision to bring the FBI into the operation was a bitter pill to swallow, but it was a very wise decision because it stopped any implication that we would take some type of revenge on those folks.
It became readily apparent that the only level of SWAT or tactical capability was the FBI's hostage rescue team.
Siege mentality on the FBI's part absolutely was in place from day one.
Next, David Koresh and the FBI play a game of cat and mouse, with more than 100 lives hanging in the balance.
It was a real emotional roller coaster ride dealing with this person.
When hundreds of FBI in Texas, they came with a clear mission: to arrest members of the Branch Davidian religious sect barricaded inside Mount Carmel.
From an FBI standpoint, we were there because the Davidians had murdered 4 federal officers and wounded 16 others.
Armored vehicles quickly surrounded the walled community, while more than 50 FBI negotiators took turns on a special phone line with Koresh, or key members of his inner circle.
It was a real emotional roller coaster ride dealing with this person.
From time to time, individuals or small groups of Branch Davidians came out voluntarily.
During the 51 days, we did get 35 people out, including 21 children.
People were coming out slowly. It was working. Every time it seemed to be working, they would do something to pressure us and make sure that people would get scared and not want to come out.
On the 7th of March, David Koresh said, "The rest of these children in here are my biological children. They're not coming out." I remember that vividly, and it just stood the hair on the back of my neck straight up.
The contentious Koresh was not the only problem for FBI negotiators. They were also at odds with their own hostage rescue team, which waged psychological warfare that was often counterproductive.
They were mooning the women and children. Guys who'd stand on tanks and pull their drawers down, grown men, working for the federal government, and bare their butts.
The FBI flooded the compound with bright lights at night, cut off the electricity, blasted disruptive noise non-stop over loudspeakers.
All they did was make us stronger as a group and make us not want to come out, make us more mistrustful of the world.
It was absolutely wrong. It was never endorsed by the negotiators. I'm sure their intent was not to drive these people into a bunker mentality, but that's exactly the effect that it had.
Following a face-to-face meeting with 2 top Davidians, the FBI felt it had worked out a deal for Koresh to come out with his followers. But Koresh again balked, saying he needed time to write down his interpretation of the 7 seals.
The 7 seals are incredibly important in that they herald the cataclysmic end of the world as we know it, according to the book of Revelation.
According to David, God told him to write down the 7 seal manuscripts, to bear witness to the world. Because if we came out, who knows what would happen to David.
When several days passed with no tangible evidence that Koresh was working on the manuscript, the FBI grew increasingly frustrated.
So this again was another delaying tactic. They had had 51 days, 5 times the longest prior siege, to come out.
The standoff at Waco had reached its most critical turning point. April 19, 1993. With approval from the White House, the FBI made plans to force the Davidians from Mount Carmel.
We banked on the natural parental instincts that if you put tear gas into that building, the parents are going to get their kids out of that environment. We underestimated the control of David Koresh. We made a mistake.
5:59 a.m. The FBI phoned the compound, warning the Davidians of the impending tear gas operation.
Complex, it is time to surrender to the proper authority. We do not want anyone to be hurt. Follow all instructions. This is not an assault.
2 FBI combat engineering vehicles, known as CEVs, began inserting gas into the compound. Some of the Davidians opened fire, while the FBI used its armored vehicles to shoot projectiles of CS gas, a potentially volatile chemical.
I hear all these popping sounds. Ferret rounds, over 400 ferret rounds fired into the building. It was 6 hours of terror, of being gassed.
Even when the powerful CEVs started breaching the compound, the Davidians refused to come out, believing that Judgment Day was at hand.
I wish people could understand how loud a tank is. They started to make holes in the building, started to totally destroy and rip apart that building.
Shortly after noon, the FBI called on Koresh to lead his followers to safety. 9 Davidians finally emerged and were quickly arrested. 12:25 p.m. Several fires started inside the compound and quickly spread, while firefighters were kept away. The FBI would later present evidence suggesting Branch Davidian leaders deliberately started the inferno, something the surviving Davidians deny.
Just remember, as the place is burning around me, not wanting to exit that building, I kept thinking, I'm going to get shot. It's over. And literally, it was a last-minute decision. It's like the wall to my right-hand side started to burn. When that happened, the side of my head was kind of singed. I could smell my hair and feel it crackling. And that's when I went out.
Within minutes, Mount Carmel burned to the ground, and the ATF raised its victory flag, ending the longest law enforcement siege in U.S. history. Inside, nearly 70 adults and more than a dozen children were dead, many from burns and asphyxiation. Exactly why some died because of their own actions or the FBI assault has remained a source of conjecture and controversy. David Koresh died of a single bullet to the forehead, apparently fired by a top aide, who then took his own life, like many others.
I think in the minds of the Davidians, they were not committing suicide. I think in their minds, they were carrying out the ultimate act of faith, and that was to stay by David's side and to be delivered up, if you will, in this cataclysmic end into the presence of the Lord.
Our plan was to come out when the 7th manuscript was done. People had their bags packed.
In fact, Koresh's manuscript of the first seal survived the fire, an indication that he was seriously working on it. In the aftermath of the Waco disaster, the federal government faced accusations of using unwarranted deadly force and engineering a cover-up. But no indictments have ever been handed down. Following a civil trial, a jury absolved the government of any financial liability. Yet many questions remain unanswered. Did the ATF's own actions set the collision course at Waco?
Our communications could have been better. Our preparations could have been better. Our intelligence could have been better. Our surveillance could have been better, yes.
Did the FBI's military-style tactics turn Mount Carmel into a veritable death trap for those inside?
Those kids were alive before the ATF and the FBI came in. They were a lot better off with David than they were at the hands of the federal government.
Or should blame fall on a self-styled Messiah seeking his moment of glory?
I think that this was a self-fulfilling prophecy by David Koresh. I think that the law enforcement, both ATF and the FBI, played right into his hands.